Hey guys, Mike here and welcome back to another video on the channel. I'm still in the workshop, still trying to get this Cherokee ready to go out and do some winter camping, and we're much closer than we were in the last video. In the last video you saw me fitting the rear bumper, and the reason I did that was I wanted to explain the rear tie-in kit, the rear frame stiffener, show how it all went together, because over the years I've had a number of questions about it, and I never really did a proper build video about the stuff I was doing. It was all kind of mixed up and a little bit difficult to follow from a viewer's perspective. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight onto how that back end's assembled there. I finally got the parts for the diesel heater too, and you can probably hear that roaring away in the background. And the purpose for buying it was for winter camping, because you can plumb it into a tent with an air duct and it blows in really hot air and you can heat up a tent. It's running off of the leisure battery, and I can't wait to try it in the awning room, and that was going to be our plan when we get out there. Now we don't run a rooftop tent. But since the last video I've done a few more jobs on the Jeep. My winter tyres arrived, and although they're not technically winter tyres, they will be soon. And I went for Cooper Discoverer ST Max PORs in a 35-1250 R15. You kind of have to run two sets of tyres here in Sweden. I've got the BF Goodrich KM3s in a 35-1250 for my summer tyre, and if you watched my Sweden Overland series where I travelled around, you'd have seen me using those tyres mostly on gravel roads, occasionally some of the more dilapidated tracks and trails out there, but mostly gravel roads, and they performed really well and I was really happy with them. I also got to have a play in them in the snow and the early parts of spring, and what you find is at certain times of year there's a crossover period where the roads are just asphalt again. You can basically legally change your tyres, but you'll find a lot of the forest tracks will still be pretty deep with snow where they haven't thawed out, and they'll still be pretty frozen underneath the snow too in some areas, so you actually kind of need an aggressive tread to get through the snow, and I found those tyres to be really good. In previous years I ran the BF Goodrich KO2 in an all-terrain pattern, and I had that studded, but now I'm running a bigger tyre with bigger lugs. It is a very good tyre, but it's definitely not a winter tyre. It doesn't have the snowflake symbol or the mountain symbol on the side of it. It is really a summer tyre. So by putting studs in, you kind of make it legal to run, and what it will mean is I'll still maintain pretty good off-road capability in the deep snow on the forest tracks, which is primarily where I use the Jeep, but it'll still be safe to run on the ice roads when you're driving on 2-3 inches of ice, you know, through the winter, and you get some of those conditions that can be just above zero. Things start to wetten out a bit, and then you're really looking at dangerous situations. You need to take it easy. But other than waiting on the tyres, I've put in a boost gauge. You saw the exhaust gas temperature gauge in the last walk around video and the kind of incomplete panel just on the driver's side dash. I plumbed in the boost gauge and it taps straight into the manifold by cylinder number 1, and hopefully that's the right position. The reason I used that is because that hole was already there, and all I had to do was back out a grub screw, and the boost gauge I bought had exactly the same thread to be plumbed in, so naturally I did that rather than take the manifold off. But I've mentioned many a times in these videos that I'm a big believer in building plastic wheel well liners for these kinds of vehicles, splash guards that exist under the vehicle to deflect rocks and stop stone damage and sandblasting. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to start putting all of the splash protection back on, and we're going to build rear wheel wells for the rear arch of the vehicle now we've got the tube fenders installed. Before I do the front and the rear wheel well, the first part to install is this centre splash plate here. I've talked about this in many videos, but if this is the first one you're seeing, this is basically a sheet of aluminium that sits below the rock slider and the floor pans, and it mounts to 4 pillars that I mounted the rock slider back to the frame stiffener. And the reason for me doing that was I spent a great deal of time doing all that work, and when you're driving forest roads out here there's a lot of stones, and they gradually sand away the underneath of the vehicle, and you kind of end up with a lot of damage over the years. So this isn't the skid plate, this isn't designed to slide over rocks and kind of make life easy, and in fact it's taken a lot of damage over the last 3 or 4 years since I've been running it. On the rocks and things you can see that they have big creases in, they're quite bent, and they're not looking so good anymore compared to when I first installed them and they're all shiny and new. But that's the whole point, they're designed to take all that crap so the vehicle doesn't have to. So this is really what we're aiming for, to mount this here like that, and that's going to offer a lot of protection against all of the rocks and things that we don't want to be just flying up and damaging all of this here. This is the box rocker welded in, frame stiffeners there, got these arms that basically come from the stiffener and weld directly to the box rocker, and they don't weld to the floor pan because the floor pan's very thin and not very structural, so it's really just these two areas, and there's 4 pillars. So that's what this bolts into, these 4 pillars, and we're going to use a spacer here to just drop it down not very far, you know, even just ½ a centimetre from the pillar, and what that'll do is it will basically just stop water getting sandwiched between the 2 surfaces and causing corrosion to build up along these areas here, which is inevitably what will happen over the years if we don't do that. So that's the armour in, and it's looking good. This is going to really help, and you can see inside we've got a pretty good gap there, so we can blast the jet wash in. You can see a nice gap between the legs with regards to the rubber spacers and stuff. You know, it's giving us plenty of breathing space in there. But let's get the front in, and then we've got to start building this back wheel well, and that's going to be a real challenge. When I made these tube fenders, I had to do a bit of trimming on the original liner, and this is the original liner here, except I've cut it so you can see it fits in like that. And we could just leave it like that, and that would provide some protection, and then put the mud flap in, which would bridge the gap just here, meaning that none of the dirt and stuff would get in between and underneath the floor pan and stuff and just build up there. But that's not really what we're going to do. I mean, I've made this sheet here out of plastic, and it's going to extend the length of the actual liner itself and kind of bridge the gap between the two, and protect underneath the flare, because obviously this sheet steel here, when stones fly up, it's just going to hammer it, and then, you know, we'll get rust in the future. So having a piece of plastic here, again separated away with a gap between the two, it's gonna really help. So we're going to get that installed now, and then you can see how everything starts to work together. So we just have to kind of get this mounted, which is going to be easier said than done, as always. That goes in like that, and we've got these little plastic plugs that's going to connect up. Hopefully it can be all held in position. So we've got that piece in, and it's looking pretty good, and it's offering quite a lot of protection, which is nice. But now we're going to put this extra piece in. We have some studs actually mounted here and here, and another one of those threaded plugs there. So that's kind of how this mounts up. And the reason I put studs was it's much easier just to get it in position exactly where you want it to be, like that, and it tends to kind of stay there. And that's really what we're aiming for. So now you're looking at the well side on, you can kind of see how it works. The only kind of extra thing I tend to do, just really to make it look a bit better, is put plastic caps on the nuts. You could argue that there's zero point in doing that, but there's zero point in many things. But this is nice, and we've got the mud flap hanging there. Now I'm gonna just kind of tie that into the to the splash plate, the aluminium splash plate, and then we're really done for the front. But one thing that's missing is just around here. What I will do with this piece is I'll kind of make another piece of plate that comes down out of this plastic, maybe put some more threaded plugs in, have something here, so what you've got is some protection for the wiring looms and stuff around there, because over the years they're going to get hammered, but that's going to come a bit later. I'm just putting a self-tapping torque head screw just here, and we have one of these little kind of nuts there, these little, I don't remember the damn names of the things anymore, but that just screws into there, and that's one of our connections at first. It doesn't need to be crazy tight, but you know, that's good enough to kind of seal up this gap here, because it's pretty unsightly actually when you assemble it. Just got a hole in the mud flap. We've got another threaded plug just in here, so I drilled that and I just set that plug in. You know, the same plugs we've been using for a lot of stuff. They're pretty good as long as you don't over tighten them, and use some seam sealer to make them waterproof. That just goes through the original liner just on the end, and we just put this in there like that, and that holds the flap in place. But now we need to connect it to the splash plate. Got a thin piece of 2mm steel here. This is galvanized actually, and just run this through the mud flap there. Drilled a hole in the bottom of here, and it just allows us to bolt that directly to the splash plate and set the mud flap back in position. Now there is a possibility that if you caught this in reverse on a bad rock or something, it'll bend that up, but hopefully it'll just move it out the way like that with the tyre and not do too much damage, apart from rip the mud flap probably, which is the least of your worries. But we just have to put a M6 through the hole just there. We just set that in position like that. Should be bitten in place anyway. We can take a washer of some description and we just pop that in place. Wrong way. Always good. We can tighten all this up later, but now you can see that thing's in position and it's offering a lot of protection, and it's stopping most of the garbage from the tyre getting up now in between this splash plate here. Well, that's the front and the centre completed, apart from that little bit on the front bumper that I've got to sort out at a later date. And I've run with that setup now for almost 4 years, and I've got to say it's been nothing but good results really. But now it's on to the back, and the back's going to be real tricky. And I have some new plastic here. This is what I've used for the front wheel well, for the tube flare. And this is going to be what we use for the back. It's actually from a sled dog company from down the road. I don't think this is enough, so I might have to see whether they've got some more I can buy. And it's a really heavy duty kind of polyurethane style plastic, I think, and it's about 3mm thick, so it's a bit thicker than I wanted it to be, but it's extremely light. But yeah, we're going to get that mounted, and like the front, I've put threaded plugs in the tube supports on the flare to allow us to get started and start mounting this up. And it is going to be a bit of trial and error, so brace yourself for some failure perhaps. So moving forward a few more days, the tyres have come back from the tyre shop and all the studs have been popped in and they're looking really good. But in the meantime, I've got the two front tyres on and they're looking great, and you can kind of see how they're working with the guards there and the mud flaps. They protrude very, very slightly, but most of the protection's in place to stop stone damage and all the rest of it from building up. And if we move on to the back, on my passenger side, rest of the world's driver's side, I've actually completed one of the wheel wells on the rear. I had a go at it and I wanted to do one first before I did the other side on video. We'll take a look at that, but I'll roll this guy out the way first. Hopefully there's enough light and you can see clearly, but obviously you can see the difference. We've got a big plastic wheel well liner now inside. It's connected to the splash plate that you just saw me install. It runs right from the back here at the bumper. It's bolted in at the bottom of the bumper through an existing bolt hole. It runs all the way to here. It connects to the back of the mud flap using two brackets, which holds the mud flap back in position. maybe at a later stage we can chain that back if we want to, if we're worried about kind of it catching and being bitten. But for the time being, it comes up and it connects to this wheel well liner, which is one plastic sheet that's been cut and shaped. As much as I don't really like this bit, you kind of need it, or else what you find is that the splash plate is open at the end. And in this piece here, it goes round like that, and it actually boxes off the bottom of the splash plate, but then there's an opening along here, and what that allows you to do, or it allows the dirt and the water and everything else to do, is drain out when it will go past here at times. You know, as you're driving along, you know, water and snow and everything else is going to go down here, and there's such a big gap between everything. You know, there's probably about this much of a gap, so nothing's really in direct contact. It can air out really well, and that's really, really important when you build these wheel wells. You don't want them to be pushing up against everything, or else that's when you start to really kind of invite corrosion in the long term, of course, not in the short term. The centerpiece is pretty necessary as well, but you'll see that it is pretty well separated from the top of the wheel well, and you might think, wow, that's a massive waste of space right there, and you've lost articulation because now your tyre can't tuck up in here as much as it could before. Now if you run a smaller tyre size like a 31 or a 32, then that might be the case, but when you start getting to tyres like a 35, 12, 50, and you start kind of pushing them out a bit with back spacing, but also modifying this area here to get more upward travel to open up the well, you'll find the tyre sticks out so much that when fully articulated, it actually can't go up any further than the ridge on the body line where you folded back the pinch welds, because, you know, sticking out so much more now. So you find a lot of this space here doesn't ever really get used anyway when you start upgrading to quite large tyre sizes like 35s and upward. Anyway, now it's time to build the wheel well liner for the other side, so we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to be tough. So we've got this sheet of plastic here. This is the 3mm kind of polyurethane plastic. You can see it's quite rigid, but it does bend pretty nicely, and with a heat gun it would bend really well. But basically what we have to do is, using a paint marker, which is really important in this process, we have to just mark some areas to bend. So we need a bend at the top there, one at the top there, and I'm just going to push this up into the corner there, get the paint marker, put a line there, and that's where we're going to do our first bend. I've marked a line here, and to do the bends I'm literally just doing this and looking to see where the point is, putting the bend in like that. So this is going to basically go up in there like that, and we're keeping the bends pretty in line with this bend here, and the bolt should then pull this in a little bit more, and then we've got to work out how to get all these angles we want and make this work. And I'd like this to be the same as the other side, but I don't think it's going to be, so we're just going to come back here, do another line there, make another bend. Before I put it in place, I'm just going to put a lot of paint on the top of these bolts, and this is going to allow us to mark where we want to drill the holes. It's a bit of a rough way of doing it, but it kind of works. You just push it up like that, and then you've got, ignoring that one there, you've got the 3 locations here now to drill holes. I'm going to go a size up on the holes. I'm just going to use a 10mm, so I can wiggle things around a bit. Hopefully this is got got a relative amount of accuracy to it. Sometimes that's not the case, but we'll just put everything in first off. We'll see how it goes. So that's everything bolted in. The shape's okay. It's not looking too bad. We've got some pretty decent coverage inside the well, and you know, as we work with this, we're just going to have to refine it, much like we did with the other side. But now the thing to do is to cut all the way along here to actually get the correct shape. Next job is to draw around this edge here and angle it in, trying not to make contact with the Raptor liner to get green paint on it, but you can wipe it away. I'm going to use the grinder on the lowest speed. That's kind of what I've been doing to do all the cutting, really, just really low speed, and then we'll get this cut. So using the grinder on a pretty low speed like that just stops it burning so hot that it fills the room with smoke, and you get a pretty clean cut, but you do have to tidy it up a little bit later, but that's no big deal. Hopefully this fits a little bit better now. This may seem a little bit of a, you know, bodge job in a way. I guess it is. But I found that when you make these liners, and this is the third set I've made for this vehicle now, it is a little bit like this at the beginning. It's a shame there isn't a company out there that just make liners for the Cherokee. A lot of other trucks get them, sadly not this one. Might need to trim that towards the end, but all in all, that's actually pretty good. It's a nice clean line. Now what we're going to do is do some relief cuts here with the grinder, also a relief cut all the way up there, and that's going to allow us to keep this bit flush against the flare and start to bend this stuff back and get it into shape, and move this up a bit at the back, so you know we don't have such a low well. So this is the relief cut we've made, and obviously I haven't worried too much about what's behind it. I'm just going to repaint that, but I'm not going full crazy with the grinder, but you can see this is really where the stress is. And if we now bend that back, we still keep that line here, so it doesn't open like it was before. But now this goes back, it can go to the back of the well, and this will be held in position, clipped along there like that, so it can be flush at the back. And then the back piece will connect to it and hold it in place, and it just gives us a bit more of an opening instead of it being like this, the way it was before. But we've got to do the same with the front. So you can see how this is kind of working now. These relief cuts here allow things to be bent back a little bit to open this up. It may seem like we've lost so much space here in terms of upward travel, but if you remember what I said, it's the very large tyre that I have. It can't go up any further than this point here, and it's going up at an angle like this. It's not just going straight up like IFS, it's rocking up, and it's basically just gonna have to be bump stops just here, for example, because it's sticking out kind of far, you know, it goes into about there. So it's not like it can use any of the original well anyway. So I'm not too bothered how low this is. It's a bit lower than the other side, and that's because the fender is slightly higher this side at this point. So it's kind of allowed this to teeter down a bit. But you know, maybe we manipulate this with a heat gun towards the end, and we'll see how it articulates first. So we're just going to take that angle off. The front will leave intact, it's not interfering with anything. This is going to be pushed back, as I say, and it's going to then connect with some screws to the back plate, which we still need to make. But I'm having a real problem here, and it's exactly the same problem I had with the other side, where I'm going to have to cut away a part of my bumper here, because when I built this bumper I had 32s, and I didn't need such a big opening. But now, as I've experienced in the past, when the tyre is fully tucked up, it tends to come back as opposed to go forward, obviously because of the nature of the leaf spring and the relocation bracket levering backward, and it will make contact with that. And then if we have sort of 5 millimeters to a centimetre of rubber here and plastic, then we're losing even more clearance. It may not seem a lot, but it's the difference between rubbing and not rubbing, and with the metal studs it's going to tear this thing apart. So I'm going to have to clip this off. We'll remove this first, or I'll cut that actually on here, then remove all that, and then I'm going to have to take the grinder and the hacksaw again and get that angle here, because you can see there we've got a bit of a gap, and that's going to really mess everything up. This is so lame. That's cut off flush there. I haven't done the best job. I did a better job the other side, but yeah, I'm just going to have to clean that up at the end of this project, get some paint on it. I'll get the cavity wax gun in there and blast the cavity wax in, and then I'm going to leave it closed with the mud flap against it. If a bit of water gets in, I don't really mind. There's a few drain holes here. It's full of cavity wax, no big deal, and it is just a bumper I made 3-4 years ago, and it isn't a particularly good one. You can see a lot of the inner wall, kind of useless, adding a lot of extra weight. And I've got the tyre carrier over there, and my plan is to build a new bumper that incorporates the mechanism off that tyre carrier and get everything rebuilt and build something a bit better that's kind of half the weight really. The bumper's 40 kilos, the tyre carrier is almost 50 kilos, plus a tyre, a 35-inch tyre. I mean, Jesus, you know, you're almost knocking on around 150 kilos just for a bumper, a tyre carrier, and one tyre, one spare tyre. Be the spare important, but at the same time, you could shave 40 kilos off of that and still have the same setup basically, or even more weight. So that's kind of why I don't care too much. But now we've got a good angle here, I'm pretty happy, and I can get the thing bolted back in and we can start working with it. So for this back piece that's going to act as like a guard really for stain damage around the back of the bumper and up in the floor pan. When I say floor pan, you know, the rear, basically this thin piece of sheet metal here always gets hammered. We're going to have a piece like this, and this is going to go in like that. It's going to probably run behind this piece, and it's going to bolt in place here and here through here with a couple of M6s. Looking good. So going to mark that in a couple of positions, and then get a straight edge, connect the dots and do a line, and then we've trimmed off the excess and we can start to work with it now. I'm also going to mark the bends required to kind of clear this, because we need to put a bend in there like that. yeah, so that's mounting really nicely, exactly how I want it to be. Just clearing before the bumper, and then we have to put another bend in. It needs to be at that level there, so I need to put it there, and then that'll connect to the back bumper. Fits. Okay, so that's going to connect to there, so it's just going to be down there, that mounts to there like that. So yeah, I think if we take it off there just to be safe. So this leaves us with enough material so we can make the front part to connect to the splash plate, and that's pretty much what we're looking for. And I just need to then cut and trim this so it's the same as the other side. I pretty much think that's it. That looks quite good. I think once it's in place it'll be okay. You won't really see it either, but it's going to offer a massive amount of protection for all this vulnerable material here, the floor panel, the thin steel and everything else. It always gets hammered, and I spent such a long time working on this vehicle, I just can't bring myself to do all this kind of stuff again, which is why I'm putting this in. So I'm going to get that screwed in place. Going to drill out the existing holes, the mounting holes under here I was just using with self-tappers. Going to put these plugs in, the threaded plugs, so things can be removed a bit easier in the future. So all the plugs are in, and I've put the bolts in and I've coated them with quite a lot of paint marker. So we're going to get this in position and do the same thing as, oh god, I've eaten too much for dinner. So again, the same tactic, all the bolts are coated with paint marker. We get this in place without touching, and then we mark it like that. And that has given us some of the holes. So we'll just go from there and we'll keep trying. This one here. Hopefully that is okay. Yeah, basically, not bad. As goofy as that technique is, it seems to work. Now we just need to make some spacers, and that's pretty simple, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that, because the last thing I want to do is have this bolted flat against any surface, because as the dirt and the water all collects, then you know, it's just a sandwich, a rust sandwich basically. It will be eventually, but having it spaced down about 1 centimetre, ½ an inch, something like that, depending on, you know, whether you work in metric or imperial, it doesn't matter as long as it's spaced. What we'll find is the water will drain away, everything will dry out, the dirt will find its way out, and when you blast it with a jet wash you can always clean it and it's no problem. So yeah, make some spacers and we'll get that in place, and then it may not need to ever come off again. These screws you get here for roofing and such, they come with like a washer with a rubber backing to them. Obviously they're designed to seal off from water, and they're pretty useful actually. What I'm going to do to mount these is we're going to have a washer first of all, although that's the wrong size bolt. So we have a washer that goes through the plastic sheet, and then what I tend to do is find a nut of some description, usually an M8 that can be placed on top like that, and then we put one of these waterproof caps on the top there, and what you'll tend to find is that gives enough breathing space then for the panel to be separated from what it's mounted to, but not too far of course. But then you've sealed in around the plug as well using one of those rubberized sort of backed washers, so water hasn't really got much of a chance of getting in there. And you can always use a bit of RTV as well if you really have to. So this is what it looks like from the other side. Got the spacers on. In my case I put the brackets for the mud flap there too, because obviously I've put RTV there and I don't really want to have to keep removing it. We just got to get all this in position now. Let's see if it all lines up how we want it to, and this is a number 10, which is why nothing's working. Alright, that is pretty good, but we got some cutting to do because it looks kind of rubbish at the moment. And that cut I almost rubbed out with my hand was right there and then down there, like that. So that's all in place, and it's pretty good. It's not as nice as the other side, but when you look at this stuff from normal standing height of the vehicle, you don't see any of it. It's really just there to do a job, and you know, you can't see anything, so it's not such a big deal as long as it's doing the job it's supposed to do. But it's in place nice and firmly. You can use aluminium for this kind of stuff, or just plate, but what you'll find is it'll be very loud when stones hit it. This stuff tends to absorb a bit of impact, but and not be as loud. It's not a sort of clack, it's more of a thud. But I have to do some trimming here, just trim a little bit of that away so it's not rubbing on the edge of this leaf spring mount here. And other than that, it's ready to be mounted now to this plate here. I've just drilled a hole there and in the material at the back. Just means we can put a bolt through. I'll have to clip all these as well with the grinder once they're done, but I'll wait to the very end because I'm going to have to take all this off and just, you know, paint and underneath some of the areas I've missed and everything. You know, whilst doing this job, we've rubbed away some of the protection here and there. If you get areas like this where it's kind of close to the material, and as you drive there'll be vibration in all this, so it will eventually rub that away. You can get a little bit of U-channel, rubber U-channel, just pop it in there just to kind of brace it against it, stop the vibration. But that is looking nice. I think the thing to do now is to get this mud flap in place, and that's kind of the back part of this protection completed. I've measured things out the other side, and this looks like where everything should be in terms of how low it hangs, how much protrusion it's coming out the fender and just past this slider here. So we really want to get it straight, which is something like that. I always oversize the holes with things like this just because it allows me to move things around a bit, but we just need to mark that. I'm going to drill a little hole there, just get it in position. Skills. Yeah. And then maybe we can pop a bolt on that. We can obviously use the existing one behind, but I'm just pinning it there for now. So that mud flap's held in place now. We've got this bolt here on the two brackets held in place there. I've taken the other one off and just used the one bolt screw and washer. Self-tapper there just to keep it back a bit. So, you know, the back end's pretty nice now. We've got a lot of protection there. You can make real fine adjustments to the angle of the mud flap too, just like that. So, you know, if you really want to dial it in, you can. But I'll adjust that later. It's just this one bracket. It's a little bit stiff, but that looks to be how I want it to be. Just want it leaning back a bit, you know, a nice diagonal angle coming off the back of the flare, so you know, the tyre can move around and it's not going to catch it. I mean, if it catches it, which it has done in the past, it normally just rips the rubber and tears it off, and that'd be a shame because these are proper old mud flaps, and I can't find them again. I had them on my old Liberty years ago when I first got into working on Jeeps, but those days are gone, and I think the mud flaps will be too one day. But maybe what we can do is put a bigger washer here too, and that will clamp it against the plate a bit more and have it back. And now it's the front, and the front is going to be the tricky part, although I think I'd probably say that about everything, but it is. This area here is particularly vulnerable, even on a stock vehicle. You can see I've got the box rocker welded in there to replace all the rusted out metal that I had there before. Originally I just had big holes and things here, is where the sheet metal connects up, and it just gets sandblasted, it rots out, and the rust starts to kind of creep all over the place. And you can see I had to put in, you know, when I did the box rocker conversion, I had to replace all of this, you know, all this metal here, apart from this bit here, but everything along there is kind of new metal. And you know, you've got to kind of do a lot to protect it, really. Even though it's got this undercoat on, all it takes is for you to be driving at 80 kilometers an hour and a stone to just come off the tyre and hit that, breach that kind of coating, and then it all begins again. So this kind of the reason why I do this sort of thing. This here is really just to protect mainly this bit here, you know, the inner bit, most part. I don't care about the sidewall too much, because it doesn't really take much damage. I mean, the reason this rotted back is because of that flange that exists there that I've actually deleted on mine. You can see it's kind of completely gone because I just continuously welded the inside and ground it round, so there was no more kind of spot welds for the rust to creep through and cause future problems. But basically what we're going to do with this design is obviously, if this was a bigger piece of plastic, I'd carry it on, but it only comes in certain lengths, the stuff I'm buying, and it just wasn't enough. So I've got a connecting piece the same as the other side, and that's going to go in there like that, and then we're going to trim it and make it look nice so it's not overhanging so much. But if you look at the design of it, you can see it's boxed off around one side, and that just kind of conforms here, and it tucks around the side of the leaf spring hanger, but it also leaves about an inch gap at the bottom here and at the side, so that when we do blast in through the side, you know, if there's any dirt, if there's any stones and things that got caught up in there, which there will be, it'll just drop out. And I've run this design before without the side plate, and you know, all I really ever got was a few stones and things that get caught in there, but then when you drove along they'd always just rattle their way out, or the jet wash would deal with it. So I'm not really too worried about anything building up in there. You can kind of take my word for it. But we're going to get this connected up and then trim it. We'll obviously clip all this off as well. You can see how that connects up there. Now we've got a pretty good protection all the way around, but with enough of a gap everywhere to let everything drop out if needed. We need to tidy this piece up now, and we're just going to make it flush with the armour, and then it's going to come up at 45 degrees here to this point, just beyond the edge of the slider, so it offers protection for that. And then we could cut in and go up, but in this case I'm just going to go straight up basically, and then round that off at the top. And we're going to do that with the grinder, and I'm going to do it actually here. Well, that well is pretty much completed now, and I had it off one more time just to touch up some areas with the Dynatrol rust protection, and I tidied up the edges of the well too, just so it looked nice and smooth. And we're protected now at the front, in the centre, in the rear well, and right the way to the back bumper. So when I'm driving forest roads with lots of gravel for many kilometres, I don't really have to worry now about stones kind of coming up off the tyre and smashing away all the paint and damaging everything over long periods of time. And it just kind of fends off that time period in which I have to kind of replenish everything again under the vehicle, because it is a massive job. I've done it twice now on this vehicle. I don't really want to do it again for, you know, another 10 years. I don't mind a little bit of annual touch-up work, you know, that just comes with owning an older car. But you know, when you've got to strip things back, cut out metal, replace stuff like you do when you initially buy a vehicle, it's not really something that I want to repeat very often at all in its lifetime. So hopefully this will offer a lot of protection, and you guys can see how it performs on the channel. You saw my last set that I've showed you. I've run that for maybe 3 or 4 years. I think it is close to 4 years now. And yeah, done a lot of off-roading in the UK, a lot of kind of wheeling and stuff with mud and everything, and I never really had any complaints about how that performed. And when you took it to the car wash and you jet washed it all out, there wasn't really much in there. It kind of finds its way out as you drive, and I guess that's down to having those big gaps in between mounting surfaces so that things don't kind of get sandwiched together. And I think that's really the most important part if you're going to build stuff like this. Make sure it can breathe, and then you're going to be okay. One major thing to add is obviously the wheel well liner is only going to be as high as the lip that you roll back on the sheet metal. So obviously you have that sheet metal, it goes in like that where the original tyre would have had room to stuff in. But you know, as I say, when you run the bigger tyre and it starts to lean up, it can only go as high as the lip, and it starts to be able to not use the original well that you have on the Cherokee. So even though that wheel well liner is only as high as that lip, that should be fine, because that's as high as I can bump stop it to anyway. So the next job really is to get the tyres on, get this out, articulate it fully, see what the damage is, see what happens, see how much room it's got in that well, and whether we need to get a heat gun and just kind of push a few things back here and there. So that's going to come in another video, and if I need to do that, I'll show it on video. If I don't, I won't. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a bit of a long one, probably not a particularly common video you see on the Cherokee. I've not really seen too many people bothered about building wheel wells, and I guess if you've got a rock basher or a secondary vehicle you don't really care much about, or you know, you're just not bothered for rock rash and stuff, and you've found other ways to protect your vehicle, you're not going to do something like this. But maybe if you've got an overlander style vehicle that does a lot of gravel driving on forest roads and then goes off onto trails and does wheeling and stuff too, maybe you want to think about it, because it really does save you a hell of a lot of maintenance work in the long run. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video. Take care.